This is going to be a quick video on how to assemble my Halo Magnum 3D files. If you're not sure of anything, just send me a quick message or leave a comment and I'll try and get back to you. This is all the parts you'll need to assemble the Magnum. I'll put a list on the screen now of all of the file names and how many of each you'll need. In terms of non-3D printed parts, you'll need 4 small springs, 1 for the trigger, 2 for the slide mechanism, and 1 for the magazine release. You can probably get the ones you need from a collection set like this, which I'll link in the description below, or you could buy them individually with the specs that I just put on the screen. You will also need 1 small screw for the magazine release. You could purchase these in the right size, or most small electronics will have these types of screws in them if you've got some spare that you could take them out of. For some of these builds I took them out of keyboards or a small LED battery pack, stuff like that. You will also need a spring for the magazine if you want that to function. Unfortunately, due to the magazine being quite small, I couldn't find a pre-made spring online, so I had to make my own. I just did this with some thin music wire and a set of pliers. I'll show later in the video exactly how I did that, but if it's too much hassle, you can just not have the magazine be spring-loaded. Everything else will still work. Lastly, you'll need something to glue it all together. I used super glue or CA glue to use its chemical term. But you could use any other strong glue like epoxy or anything else that bonds plastic together well. One other thing that I think you should use, but is optional, is a little bit of grease on the moving parts, such as the slide and the trigger, just because they're 3D printed, where some of the layer lines are or where there's slight imperfections in the prints can rub against each other and not move as nicely as they should, and the grease just helps with that. The first thing to assemble is the trigger mechanism. The trigger slides in through the hole just here like this. And the first thing you're going to want to do is apply a bit of grease to any part where the trigger mechanism moves. Just a little bit, you don't need a lot. Apply it in these areas here on the grip, and then also a little bit around the circular parts on the trigger. Next up is the spring to make it work, and that attaches on just here. It's a little bit hard to see with the lighting in the video, but it should be fairly obvious in real life. Just slide it over until the ring catches on the little notch and locks it into place. Once that's attached, flip it upside down and grab the other end, pull it taut, and then loop the trigger through the other hole. And then fit the trigger into the grip. With that done, the last part of the trigger mechanism is the plug to keep it in place. Apply some glue to the bits shown here, being careful not to get any glue on the parts that move as you don't want the trigger to be stuck, and then put the plug in. You may have to hold it down for a little bit to get it to stay, depending on what glue you're using. One more thing you can do for the trigger, but this is optional, is apply some little bits of hot glue to where the spring attaches. This is just to keep it extra secure if you're worried about it popping off. Continuing with parts on the grip, we can install the magazine release. For this, you'll need your compression spring, and then take a look at your model, because depending on whether you printed the right-handed or the left-handed version, it will be slightly different. Basically, you just need to look for which side has the bigger hole. There'll be a bigger hole and a smaller hole. Push the compression spring into the bigger hole, make sure that it goes in all the way, and then take the long piece of the magazine release and put it through the spring. Make sure that it can move freely. Then take the other part of the mag release, making sure the little notch is on the inside, line it up with the first piece, screw it in with the small screw from the start, and again make sure that it moves freely. With that done, we can move on to assembling the slide mechanism. We need to assemble the slide mechanism before adding this piece, because once we add this piece we can't get the slide on anymore. The first thing to do is to glue in the 2 rails for the slide. Just put some glue in the 2 slots and then stick them in. The only thing to be wary of here, due to 3D printer tolerances or slight variations, they might not be perfectly upright and that could cause problems later on, so just make sure they're upright. Once they're nice and glued in there, just take the slide and test fit to make sure that it moves freely across the rails. Next, we'll take this piece, which is the slide spring holder, and do the same, a bit of glue and stick it in there. Now we need to add the springs into the back of the slide. For this, you'll need the 2 extension springs that I noted earlier, or you can just use one, it depends how strong you want force on the slide to be. This part can be a bit fiddly, but you just need to hook the ring over the little lip on the back, apply some tension to it, and you will definitely need a glue gun for this part, otherwise they have a tendency to jump out of the little bit that holds them. Apply a bit of hot glue to seal the spring in, and then do the same on the other spring. Once the glue dries, we need to attach those 2 springs to the other end on the slide. This is probably the hardest part of the whole construction and it can be fiddly, but after a few tries it should be fine. It's probably easiest to do this 1 spring at a time. If you pull one of the springs out and then loop it onto the hook, when trying to attach the second spring, you should try and keep tension on the first spring, as otherwise it will have a tendency to come loose and come out of the hook. This is where it can be difficult. But if you hold the slide back and then pull out the other spring and try and hook it over as well, once they're both in there, they should both sit quite nicely due to the tension on the springs. Also, just make sure that this rear slide piece slides and fits onto the rails as well. Once you've got them both in, once again, just seal them in with some hot glue to make sure that they can't come out. And that's the rear slide piece done. It won't quite be locked in until you glue in the front slide piece, but that's the hard bit finished. To attach the front part of the slide, we need to just add some glue around this part here. But we need to be careful once again not to get any glue on the moving parts. So stay away from the rails or the base part. We just need glue on the bit where the 2 parts connect. So add a bit of glue to this bit, stick the 2 pieces together, and then again just give it a bit of a movement and have a look around to make sure that you haven't got any glue in any parts where there shouldn't be. With the slide now attached and functioning, we can attach the front piece. For this, we just need to put some glue in these 4 holes, stick some pins in, wait for them to dry, stick some glue in the same holes in the top piece, pull the slide back just a little bit, otherwise you can't get this piece on, and then push it down. Once you've got it on there nice and secure, once again, just pull the slide back and make sure that there isn't any excess glue leaked out into anywhere where it shouldn't, and it's going to stick part of the mechanism together. The last piece on the top bit is optional, but there is a little sight if you wanted to add that in. That just goes in the little slot here, and like the slide rails earlier, just be careful and make sure that it goes in straight because it can go in a little bit wonky. Next up, we can attach the top bit to the grip. This is just done with 2 more pins. Glue is optional at this point. You can just use the right size pins to get a tight friction fit if you wanted to dismantle it later or take it apart to carry it somewhere. There are 3 different sets of pins, so there should be one that will give a nice tight friction fit. You can also glue it if you like, if you want it to be stuck together more permanently. Same as before, just use any sort of strong plastic glue. The top bit is optional if you wanted the gun to have more of a Halo 2 ODST sort of look. However, if you do want it, it's just attached with 4 more pins, this time the smaller ones. Once again, you can have this as just a friction fit so that you can swap back and forth, or you can glue it on permanently. Last but not least, there's just the little front light on the top. Stick a bit of glue in this hole, push it in, and that's the main body of the gun done. Now, onto the magazine. As I explained earlier, I couldn't find a spring of the right size online, so I had to make my own. Again, this is entirely optional. This is one part of the gun that you could just leave non-functional. Everything else would still function if you think this is too complicated or you don't want to. If you do want to, you'll need some thin music wire. I used 0.5mm. as it doesn't need to be particularly strong and it's easier to bend and less likely to cause any injuries. You'll also just need some pliers and some sort of safety equipment, just goggles, glasses, just something to protect your face. If you start by pulling out approximately 5 feet of wire, it can be a bit more, a bit less, that's just a rough guide. Once you have your length of wire, you can try to straighten it out by just bending the curve out of it by hand if you want to, but given this is quite a small, tight spring, it doesn't matter too much. Even with the bend in the wire, it should work just fine. Once you have your length of wire pulled out, take the pliers and the 3D printed magazine. Make sure that your pliers are thinner than the hole in the magazine. Basically, just make sure you can fit the pliers in the magazine, because we'll be bending the wire around the pliers. If they're too wide, then the spring you make won't fit inside the magazine. At this point, it's important to make sure that you have some sort of face protection. Glasses, goggles, face mask, just something to protect your eyes. This wire can have a tendency to spring back if it was to slip out of the pliers or slip out of your hands, and it could spring into your face, and it's quite sharp. So you want to make sure you don't hurt yourself. Take the wire and measure it up against the magazine to make sure that you're not going to make the spring too wide. And then all we're going to do is simply bend the pliers round to create a 180-degree bend in the wire. So we want the wire to go back on itself. You can see on screen now the sort of bend that we're going for. You want this first one to be flat to create a nice base to rest on the bottom of the magazine. After this, we're going to do the same thing again, but just measure it up against the magazine to again make sure you're not making it too wide. You'll want to keep doing this as you go, because sometimes you can lose track. And then again, just bend the wire 180 degrees round the pliers. This time, you want to bend it at like a 30 to 45 or so degree angle, so that you create the spring. And then we're just going to keep bending the wire like this, checking the measurements as we go. Sometimes as well you might have to bend it a little bit with your hands just to correct it if it's not quite right, but yeah, just keep bending it so the same sort of angle until it's the whole length of the magazine. Once you have it the whole length of the magazine, take some wire clippers and clip it away from the reel. And then we're just going to bend it around again at the top to create another flat surface for the bullet loader to sit on. At this point you should have a completed spring and we can assemble the magazine. For the magazine assembly you'll need these 4 pieces and the spring we just made. Once again for this part I find it best to apply a little bit of grease just to help all the parts move smoothly. Again, this is optional, you don't have to do it, but it just makes everything work a little bit more smoothly. Just a bit inside the magazine, some on the spring, and a little bit on the bullet loader. You don't need too much, just a little bit. Once you've got all the parts greased up, take the bullet loader and slide it into the bottom of the magazine. Then take the spring and do the same. Lastly, take the bottom part of the magazine and stick it in there. Before you glue it all, you want to assemble it like this and then take a pencil and test that the spring works and doesn't catch on anything on the way up and down, because once it's all glued together, it's quite difficult to get it apart. Once you're sure it's working properly, attach some glue onto the bottom bit here and stick it in. Last but not least, we need to stick the whole magazine into the bottom bit. Now there is a correct way around to do this, so you just need to make sure you don't get it the wrong way around. To do that, there's a small entrance on the front here where the bullets go, and that side needs to point to the front of the bottom bit, which is the bigger bit. So you can see the way I'm doing it here. Another way to check if you're really not sure is to put the magazine into the gun, because it won't go in and lock into place if it's in the wrong way around. So slide it in like so, and you can see if it's in the correct way it will lock in with the pin. If you put it in the wrong way, it won't lock in and it'll be able to slide freely. The correct way around for the bottom piece is this way here. So yeah, again, don't get it wrong, because once you glue it in, it's going to be pretty damn hard to get it out. And then just stick a bit of glue in and shove it in there. And with that, the whole thing is done. The only thing left to do is grab the magazine, stick some bullets in, and load it up. If you liked this, feel free to check out some of my other videos on YouTube or check out my Instagram. And if you wanted to support this in any way, I do have a Ko-fi page, and also the files are on Etsy or Cults if you did want to buy them to donate. Thanks for watching, and if you had any questions, feel free to leave a comment or send me a message and I'll try to get back to you.